So what's better for improving? Is it input or output? Oh, sorry. Do you really need a lot of money to study languages? And are older people really worse at learning languages?
What the heck? I'm only 29! Okay, get that camera out of my stupid face!
Today, let's talk about language learning myths. Okay, let's have a look. Translating from your mother tongue is bad. Yeah, so this is pretty controversial. Generally, I think you should avoid this, but it's easier said than done, right? It's so automatic that sometimes we can't help it. Translating from one language to another is not always bad, but always relying on translations, that can be a problem. Generally, single words are okay. If I use Japanese as an example, ringo, apple, iku, go. These are very simple. Cultural words are a bit more difficult though. For example, in Japan there's an idea called gokon, which is kind of like a group date where 3 men and 3 women come together and kind of try to find a romantic partner. But for example, in the UK, we don't really have this kind of culture. The closest thing I can think of is speed dating.
Positive person. I always try to make a good impression by being a funny guy, thinking of original things to do.
But anyway, gokon is special to Japan, so even if you translate it, other countries don't have that culture, so you can't really translate it. However, idioms are interesting. Sometimes there is a direct translation, because idioms often are borrowed and they travel between countries. For example, in English we say 2 birds, 1 stone. But in Japanese you say 二鳥一石. Is that right? Yes, that's right. 二鳥一石 or 一石二鳥. But again, it depends on the idiom. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. But there's one more very important point. Just because you can directly translate something, that doesn't always mean that it's commonly used. For example, in English, we often ask people, "How are you?" It's a question we ask to co-workers like almost every day. And in Japan, you can say, "O genki desu ka?" But foreigners use this phrase a lot when in Japan and speaking Japanese, but Japanese people don't say this that often. They do ask it sometimes, but definitely not as much as British people or Americans ask, "How are you?" It's just a different culture. Okay, grammar and vocabulary equal fluency. Okay, I think I've got it. First of all, let's talk about fluency. Fluency is how smoothly and easily you can speak. But fluency is very different to accuracy. Accuracy is being able to speak perfectly with no mistakes. Even if your grammar is perfect and your vocabulary is amazing, if you're pausing for 5 seconds between each sentence, you're not speaking fluently. Now, back to the question, grammar plus vocab equals fluency. Yes, generally this is true, but not always. For example, if I ask you, what do you think about video games? If you're a gamer and you play games often, then yeah, maybe you can talk about this for hours. But if you don't play video games, then it's pretty hard to talk about this, right? So if you get an unexpected question about a topic that you're not familiar with, then of course it's difficult to share your opinion. Actually, maybe you don't have an opinion. And this means it's difficult to talk about. But this isn't a problem with grammar or vocabulary, but a problem with general knowledge. That's why sometimes the most fluent people are not the people who have the best grammar or vocabulary, but the people who have had the most experiences and have more stories to tell.
One. They've swung around the lamppost. They're coming back.
If I had to give one piece of advice, it would be get a piece of paper, something like this, and write down the topics that you are familiar with and can talk about easily. Now, in another column, write down a list of topics that you want to talk about, but you don't, or you haven't spoken about so much. And then when you have a conversation with someone, you can focus on these other topics.
Number 3.
Output is better than input. So yes, output, writing or speaking, is better for improving quickly than input, that is just reading or listening. However, you can't output something that you don't know. So at the beginning, you have to input or learn something first. But after that, you should try to use the word, write your own example sentences or talk about it in a conversation. So if I had a day off, I would prefer to do output, writing or speaking. But when I'm working, for example, on the train to work, you can't always output. So in this case, input is perfect because you can do it maybe while doing other things like traveling.
Next one. Let's have a look. Oops.
Older people are worse at learning languages. Oh, I have very strong opinions about this one. I already know my answer. Okay, I am so ready to talk about this. So, people often compare older people to young children, and everyone knows that young children are really good at copying words and phrases that they hear from their parents. And it is also known that as we get older, we forget things more often. If we only think about these brain differences, then for older people, yes, it's a bit more difficult. But there are two other things that we really have to think about. And the first one is experience. Older people are already native in their mother tongue, so it's much easier to make connections and translate words. There are many times when you learn a new phrase and you think, oh, we also have that phrase in our language. But children can't do this because they still don't know those phrases in their own language. And, as I said earlier, general knowledge is also super important. A child can't learn the word DNA if they don't understand the idea. The second thing is motivation. Now, children, they learn language in their mother tongue because they have to, they need to communicate with their parents. But also, when children learn a foreign language, in school, for example, no one likes copying grammar rules and studying from a textbook.
Will not sleep in my class. So must say. Ow.
Long story short, children generally don't have the motivation or understand the value of studying languages. However, adults do. Adults often study languages so that they can travel, so they can meet new people from all around the world, and that's why they have the motivation to study. And this is why I strongly believe that if you, for example, have a teenager and an older person, if they both study a foreign language for 5 years, I do not think the younger person will be much faster or better at learning a language than the older person. Okay, so you need to know idioms to be fluent. Oof, this is a good one. Idioms are like spice or seasoning. They're nice to have, but they're not always necessary. For example, in English, we have an idiom, it's not rocket science, and this means it's not difficult. Now, if you say it's not difficult instead of it's not rocket science, that's perfectly natural, that's okay. There are two main advantages of using idioms. Number one, sometimes they're a nice shortcut for saying something long. And another reason is because it makes you sound kind of cool and smart and natural. However, I will say that if you use too many idioms, even if you use them perfectly, it sounds a bit unnatural. It almost sounds like you're Shakespeare and you're trying to explain everything in a beautiful, poetic way. And then other people just think, this guy's just showing off. But yes, idioms, they're nice to use sometimes, but you definitely don't need them to be fluent.
Let's have a look. Next one.
Learning a language costs a lot of money and time. Okay, so there are two things here, time and money. Does language learning take a lot of time? Yes, 100% yes. But money, on the other hand, this one's more interesting. Nowadays, many people spend a lot of money on things like textbooks, lessons, and especially language schools. Woof, they are pricey. So yes, you can spend thousands, tens of thousands of pounds or dollars on learning a language, but you don't have to. Some of you might think, oh, if you're a genius, then you can learn just by self-studying. But I have been studying Japanese for 7 years, and I'm stupid. Oh, okay, maybe not stupid, but I'm like average IQ, I think. Right now, I'm pretty confident in my Japanese level. Simply put, spending money on a good teacher, a great school, and nice textbooks, it makes it easier. But that's money and life, right? Money makes life easier. But it's not always necessary to spend. My advice is if you're a working adult and you're super busy and you have a bit more money to spare, then yeah, go to a language school on weekends and buy these expensive, courses. But in the long term, things like motivation and regularly studying, that will help you improve a lot more.
I think this is the last one.
Last one. If you live in a foreign country, you will learn naturally and quickly.
Okay, got it.
For most people, going to live in another country is a great language learning experience, and you'll improve naturally and quickly. However, I think the people who make the most progress are intermediate learners. If you're a beginner, for example, you know how to introduce yourself, but you can't make small talk, or you don't know how to talk about your hobbies in like a deep level. This means living in a foreign country where everything is in a foreign language, that's going to be really stressful and tiring. And you're always going to be like looking up new words in the dictionary, and you'll be feeling embarrassed when you talk to people because you can't express yourself. Humans are emotional creatures. Sometimes we lose motivation because we're stressed or depressed, and then we don't want to study. This happens a lot with beginners going to a foreign country. On the flip side, high-level advanced students, they're already really good, so it's harder to improve because there's not much to learn. They already know a lot. But intermediate learners, especially people who are good at asking questions and very sociable, they like to talk to people and have long conversations, they are going to improve the most and fastest. So yes, if you go to live in a foreign country, you will definitely improve. But how fast you improve and your experience, maybe it's a positive one, you make lots of friends, or a very stressful experience and you feel lonely, that can depend on your level too. So there we have it. Those are my opinions, but what do you think? Maybe you disagree, and that's okay. Maybe you can share some of your experiences down in the comments below. But for now, thank you very much for watching, have a wonderful day, and bye for now.